Welcome to the Hindi Daily.
It's great to be here.
So we are diving right into today's first article from the editorial section, and it focuses heavily on global resource security, starting with the literal fuel that runs the world.
Right, the global oil market.
Yeah, exactly. Because Brent crude just recently surged over $118 a barrel. And the sources point out that we are operating under this profound geopolitical shower right now.
We really are. I mean, you look at the conflict between Israel and Iran, plus the massive disruptions in the Bab el-Mandeb and Suez corridor.
Which is wild because roughly 20% of global supplies are effectively sidelined right now.
Yeah.
But not because of actual planned production cuts by the suppliers. It's totally circumstantial.
Exactly. The actual supply hasn't just vanished from the earth. It's the pathway to get it to the buyers that is completely compromised right now.
Right.
Historically, a geopolitical shock like this causes a brief price spike, and then things stabilize as trade routes adjust. But the mechanism of influence has actually shifted. Well, it's no longer just about a physical shortage of barrels. The market is now pricing in the financial, the logistical, and political uncertainties surrounding literally every single shipment.
It's almost like looking at a nervous system, right? Like the anticipation of pain, the geopolitical sentiment is causing just as much systemic shock as the actual injury of a physical supply drop.
That is a really great way to look at it.
And we're seeing strategic petroleum reserves being used differently now, like the G7's massive 400 million barrel release.
Yeah, that was huge.
They are being deployed as psychological painkillers to calm the markets, not just to fill empty tanks. But I do have to push back here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
With the massive global push for electric vehicles and renewables, why on earth is the global economy still this sensitive to oil logistics?
I mean, it's a completely fair question,
Yeah.
but the energy transition is creating a highly segmented market right now. Passenger EVs are definitely impacting standard fuel use, but global oil demand still exceeds 105 million barrels a day.
Wow, over 100 million.
Yeah, because the demand for petrochemicals, which go into plastics, fertilizers, manufacturing, along with aviation fuel, is just surging.
Oh, right. It's not just cars.
Exactly. So for importing nations like India, energy security is no longer just a physical procurement problem. It's about building resilience against financial shocks.
Navigating the hidden costs.
Right, like managing skyrocketing shipping insurance, navigating super complex international payment systems, and just surviving entirely unpredictable freight rates.
That makes a lot of sense. So moving on to our second article, this one shifts from energy to an even more fundamental resource, water.
Yes, a massive topic right now.
And it seems like climate stress is forcing a complete rethink of our survival infrastructure. The recent COP30 conference in Belém, Brazil, integrated water, sanitation, and hygiene, commonly called Wash into Global Climate Accountability.
Right, through those 59 adaptation indicators.
Yeah. What does that actually mean for us?
Well, it's a critical evolution in how we measure climate readiness. Previously, adaptation was often just this abstract financial promise, but the Belém indicators turn it into a measurable engineering discipline.
Oh, interesting. So it's concrete now.
Exactly. They're looking at risk governance, like universal multi-hazard early warning systems and truly climate-resilient water systems. We see India making some big structural moves here with the Ministry of Jal Shakti.
And the NUM 2.0 groundwater management program,
Yes,
right?
because NUM 2.0 goes way beyond just mapping aquifers. It actually creates 3D models of groundwater and assigns community-level extraction plans.
Wait, just to clarify the core idea here for everyone listening, we are essentially realizing that standard municipal plumbing and sanitation aren't just basic utilities anymore.
Right.
They are actual frontline defense gear against climate disasters.
Precisely. That is exactly it. The baseline metric for resilience is no longer just the sheer number of pipes a country has laid down. It's about whether that water system actually survives a catastrophic flood or an extended drought. If a disaster hits, your sanitation system is your very first line of defense against widespread waterborne disease.
But the systemic risks remaining must be immense, right?
Oh, absolutely. There is highly fragile adaptation finance, meaning the capital required to harden these systems simply isn't there yet. And there's massive digital fragmentation.
What do you mean by digital fragmentation?
Well, we need real-time AI-driven integration of hydrological data into local governance to actually predict these system failures. But right now, that integration is still heavily siloed.
That is concerning. Well, moving over to the opinion section today, we are looking at a very different kind of system failure.
Yes, a deeply human one.
Exactly. Our legal systems are having to rapidly adapt when biological systems irreversibly fail. The article details the incredibly tragic case of Harish Rana.
Right. He was in a persistent vegetative state, or PVS, for 13 years following a fall.
It is just a devastating reality for any family to go through. His parents and doctors tended to him for over a decade with absolutely no neurological improvement.
And ultimately, the Supreme Court allowed the withdrawal of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, which they refer to as CNH, allowing nature to take its course.
This is where the legal mechanics are a bit confusing to me. Providing a patient with food and water through a tube, I mean, that feels like basic human care.
I know, it does.
So how is that legally classified as a medical treatment that can be withdrawn?
That exact friction was the crucial legal question before the court. The medical reality is that CNH requires very careful, experienced medical supervision.
It's not just a simple procedure.
Exactly. It requires periodic clinical evaluation and constant emergency management to prevent complications like aspiration. Because it requires that high level of clinical intervention, it undeniably constitutes medical treatment.
Okay, I see.
And the legal evolution to get to this point has taken decades, actually. It started with the GN Carr case in 1996.
Right, which ruled the right to life does not include the right to die.
Yes. And then the Aruna Shanbhag case in 2011 recognized passive euthanasia, which eventually led to the Common Cause Guidelines in 2018.
So what was the underlying logic the court applied in this specific case?
The logic is that a doctor's duty continues only as long as the treatment offers some actual therapeutic benefit. When neurological recovery is impossible, prolonging mere biological existence without any clinical benefit violates Article 21 of the Constitution.
Which is the right to life with dignity.
Exactly.
So the law essentially has to step in to restore dignity when nature's course is artificially paused.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
Well, speaking of nature taking its course, turning to the science section today, nature is violently showing us the consequences of shifting ecological baseline.
The Himalayas, yeah.
Yeah. The article covers an ISRO study on the August flash flood in Dharauli, Uttarakhand. What stands out to me is that this wasn't a typical glacial lake outburst flood, which is what we usually hear about.
Right. It was very different.
It was actually caused by the collapse of an exposed ice patch in the Nivation area of the Shikanta Glacier.
And the mechanism of this disaster is exactly why our early warning systems desperately need an upgrade. A nivation hollow is essentially this depression on a mountain slope, formed by the alternate freezing and thawing of snow.
Okay, so it's a structural depression.
Yeah. And what ISRO satellite data revealed was the real-time impact of ongoing deglaciation. Rising temperatures thinned out the protective seasonal snow and fern.
Fern is the dense, granular ice, right?
Yes, exactly. And when that melted, it exposed the bare, highly vulnerable ice patch underneath.
It's basically like an insulated cooler.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, once the protective lid of seasonal snow melts away, the ice inside is exposed to direct heat. It destabilizes, fragments, and just collapses, releasing a massive torrent of ice, meltwater, and debris downstream.
To take that cooler idea even further, when that lid comes off, the reaction isn't just gradual melting. It is a catastrophic structural failure. And this raises a vital point for disaster preparedness. Regional hazard assessments simply can't just monitor the large, obvious glacial lakes anymore.
We have to look at the smaller stuff.
Exactly. We have to utilize pre-event satellite imagery to track these smaller, overlooked instabilities in nivation hollows. Because if we don't spot the protective snow thinning, these ice patches will continue to collapse without warning, wiping out downstream villages.
That is terrifying. Okay, opening up the text and context section today, we have 3 distinct articles. First up is a look at international trade, which is buckling under aggressive new political pressures.
Yes, the U.S. Trade Representative investigations.
Exactly. 2 new investigations under Section 301B of the Trade Act of 1974. The first alleges excess manufacturing capacity in sectors like solar, steel, and petrochemicals across 16 economies. The U.S. actually cites a $58 billion trade deficit with India, though India's internal reporting puts that number at $42.2 billion. And the second investigation looks into alleged forced labor practices across 60 countries.
Now, before we dive into this, we should explicitly state that we are merely unpacking the source material here.
Absolutely. We are strictly neutral, just reporting on the geopolitical mechanics at play, not taking any sides.
Exactly. So to understand what's happening, you have to look at the mechanics of Section 3 301B. It's a specific U.S. statute designed to give the president broad authority to investigate and retaliate against foreign practices that restrict U.S. commerce.
Meaning they can act outside standard World Trade Organization dispute mechanisms.
Yes, essentially. And trade experts are closely analyzing this right now because the U.S. currently has a temporary 150-day 10% global tariff in place.
Right. So I have to ask pointedly, are these investigations genuinely about labor and market fairness, or is Section 301B essentially a legal loophole to justify rolling over that temporary tariff into permanent lasting tariffs once the window expires?
Well, the international community is deeply divided on that exact question. The European Union has aggressively pushed back, stating they will launch retaliatory measures for any breach of established trade agreements.
I aren't backing down.
Not at all. In contrast, Indian industries, particularly textiles and engineering, are taking a much more cautious wait-and-see approach.
Why is that?
Because they recognize these 301B investigations are incredibly long, drawn-out processes. Plus, Indian exporters are already navigating existing complex tariffs on commodities like steel and aluminum. They don't want to rock the boat prematurely.
That makes sense. Also, in text and context, we see this instinct to erect protective barriers happening at the state level, mapping new boundaries inside communities.
Yes, the Rajasthan legislation.
Right. Let's look at the newly passed Rajasthan Prohibition of Transfer of Immovable Property in Disturbed Areas Bill. This legislation requires explicit district magistrate approval for any property transfers in areas the government formally declares as disturbed.
And it's drawing significant comparisons to the Disturbed Areas Act currently active in Gujarat.
It is. And again, just to reiterate for you listening, we are maintaining absolute political neutrality here, purely analyzing the constitutional arguments presented in the article.
Yes. So the stated legislative intent of the bill is to prevent distressed sales of property by minorities during times of severe communal violence or riots.
Right.
The mechanism requires the district magistrate to conduct an inquiry to ensure a property sale is entirely voluntary and not the result of coercion or physical threat. However, the execution of this law creates significant constitutional friction.
I can definitely see why. I mean, if the intent is to stop forced distress sales, that makes sense on paper. But by requiring government permission to sell your own house based purely on geographic classification, doesn't this run the risk of legally mandating spatial segregation or essentially ghettos?
That is the core legal debate happening right now. You have Article 300A, which explicitly protects a citizen's right to property, clashing directly with Article 14.
Which guarantees equality before the law.
Exactly. The opposition's primary concern is that vague legislative terms like disturbed area give far too much administrative discretion to local authorities.
It's too open to interpretation.
Right. The fear is that instead of promoting community integration, it institutionalizes communal boundaries in the housing market. Because if selling across community lines requires heavy bureaucratic approval, the market naturally segregates. People just won't bother with the friction.
That's a fascinating legal tension. Rounding out the text and context section, we move from local property maps to the geopolitics of what can be seen from space.
Yes, the satellite imagery article.
Yeah, the article breaks down how Google Maps actually blurs certain countries for security reasons. For a long time, the Kyle Bingaman Amendment forced satellite imagery of Israel to be blurred to a 2-meter resolution.
Which was only updated to a sharper 0.4 meters back in 2020.
Right. And we also see South Korea, which has resisted sharing mapping data for years, finally agreeing to export high-precision data, but with strict conditions like blurring sensitive military facilities.
The underlying logic for these nations is strictly state security. Countries that face hostile neighbors or active conflicts argue that clear, turn-by-turn navigation and high-resolution satellite imagery can easily be weaponized.
Weaponized by state or non-state actors.
Both, really, to target critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
But this creates a profound tension between national security and the need for global transparency.
It creates a literal digital fog of war. When governments force commercial mapping platforms to blur their borders or degrade image quality, what happens to open-source journalists?
That is the massive trade-off.
Right. What about human rights activists who rely on that satellite data to uncover the truth on the ground?
That is the exact debate. High-quality satellite imagery is a vital objective tool for modern journalism. It allows the world to document infrastructure destruction in conflict zones entirely independently of state narratives.
Like we've seen in Gaza.
Yes, exactly. Furthermore, In the age of AI, satellite data is critical for debunking disinformation. Recently, researchers used clear satellite data to definitively disprove an AI-generated image of an allegedly destroyed U.S. base in Qatar.
Oh, wow, I didn't know about that.
Yeah. So the resolution of these maps isn't just a technical specification, it is an active geopolitical battle over who controls the visual truth of the planet.
That is incredible to think about. Okay, turning over to the business section today. While nations fret about maps and borders, global retail giants are figuring out how to successfully cross them by localizing their corporate DNA.
The Ikea piece.
Yeah, I was fascinated by Ikea CEO Patrick Antoni's strategy for their expansion in Tamil Nadu. They have roughly 15,000 products globally, but they specifically curated 6,500 of them just for the Indian market.
It's a massive shift in strategy.
They are making an enormous 10,500 crore investment, and they're operating at a loss right now, with the ambition to quadruple sales by 2030.
The strategy here relies on deep, granular sociocultural research. They don't just export a rigid Swedish model. They study how local populations actually live.
Right.
Financially, they're willing to absorb massive initial operating losses over several years to firmly embed themselves and capture India's long-term demographic dividend.
They also mention Russia in the article, right?
Yes, the article highlights their principled exit from Russia over the Ukraine war. They shut down a massive, highly profitable operation, liquidated their real estate, and let go of thousands of employees.
Just completely pulled out.
Yeah, because operating there violated their corporate values, and honestly, the international supply chains were completely shattered anyway.
That is a massive corporate pivot. But going back to their local research in India, it shows that the secret to global domination isn't just a one-size-fits-all Allen wrench, right?
No, definitely not.
It's knowing that Swedes generally put their shoe racks in the hallway, but Indians often leave their shoes outside and might need solutions for putting a washing machine on a balcony.
Exactly.
You literally have to design the inventory to reflect the customer's actual daily friction points.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
If the architectural footprint of average urban apartments is smaller, you prioritize modular solutions that utilize vertical wall space. The core business philosophy is about adapting the product ecosystem to the cultural environment.
Rather than forcing the local environment to adapt to the product.
Right. It takes way more investment up front, but the long-term loyalty it builds is unparalleled.
Moving to the foreign section now. The realities of international conflict bring us to a much darker topic. The terrifying return of nuclear posturing on the world stage.
Yes, this is a very heavy article.
The sources detail the recent Israeli and U.S. strikes on Iran's threshold nuclear program. And what the article really highlights is the glaring double standard embedded in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which was established in 1970.
Right.
Iran is a signatory to the treaty and faces crippling economic sanctions. Meanwhile, Israel, which is not a signatory and has an estimated 90 nuclear warheads, faces absolutely no International Atomic Energy Agency inspections.
And again, we need to strictly maintain our absolute neutrality here as we unpack this. We are just analyzing the geopolitical framework presented in the text.
Yes, absolutely. We are merely reporting on the treaty's dynamics.
So to understand the disparity, you really have to look at how the NPT was structured. It was designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons by offering peaceful nuclear technology in exchange for non-proliferation commitments.
Right.
Because Iran signed the treaty, it is legally bound to its inspection frameworks. Iran maintains its program is strictly peaceful, though intelligence experts categorize it as a threshold strategy.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they acquire the technical capacity to build a weapon for diplomatic leverage without actually assembling one. Now, Israel never signed the NPT, so legally, it operates outside that inspection framework entirely.
Okay, that makes sense from a purely legal standpoint.
But what we're really seeing overall is the fracturing of the entire global nuclear order. The Cold War architectures that maintained balance, like the New START treaty between the U.S. and Russia, have expired without replacement.
So I have to ask the critical question here. If the rules only apply to the countries that sign the treaty and the ones that don't get a free pass, hasn't the NPT effectively lost its teeth?
Well, a lot of experts would agree with you, and that instability is directly rippling into Europe right now. We are seeing France offering a European nuclear deterrent to EU allies like Germany.
Wait, really? France is offering its own umbrella?
Yes. The America First policies of recent U.S. administrations have deeply shaken European trust in the reliability of the American nuclear umbrella. Wow. If allied countries feel they can no longer rely on international treaties or historical defense pacts for their protection, the acquisition of independent nuclear weapons becomes an incredibly attractive, rational choice. We are rapidly entering a new, highly volatile nuclear age.
That is incredibly sobering. Well, we will close out today's deep dive with two pieces from the Spotlight section. First, looking at how the breakdown of order isn't just a global nuclear threat. We see the exact same erosion of trust at the community level when local ties violently snap.
Yes, the Hastsal colony incident.
The article reports on the tragic events in Hastsal colony, Delhi, where Tarun Bhutolia lost his life. The trigger for this violence was a dispute over an 11-year-old dropping a holy water balloon from a balcony.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It really is. That incident escalated into a fight between two families, which was rapidly communalized by outside groups. Ultimately, 14 adults and 3 minors were arrested, and the Municipal Corporation of Delhi initiated bulldozer action on the homes of the accused.
And just to reiterate, we are staying entirely neutral here, just analyzing the anatomy of the event as reported.
Of course. It is just genuinely shocking to read. How does a neighborhood squabble over a water balloon, jump straight to rapid municipal demolitions and outside right-wing groups calling for police encounters?
Unpacking the anatomy of this riot reveals how hyper-local disputes are so easily weaponized today. The police investigation noted these two specific families had known each other for 5 decades.
50 years.
Right, they had mundane, regular altercations over things like parking. But the landscape changed entirely when social media and outside actors flooded the zone.
They hijacked the narrative.
Exactly. Outside groups held processions and made open calls for violence, completely transforming a neighborhood squabble into a massive communal flashpoint.
But how does a local administrative system fail that quickly in response?
It fails when systemic responses bypass established due process. The MCD demolitions were carried out without standard municipal notice, leading to immediate petitions in the High Court regarding the lack of adherence to Supreme Court guidelines on anti-encroachment drives.
Which just adds fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. And if we look at the broader lingering impact, the entire community suffers a profound economic and psychological devastation.
Everyone loses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The local markets closed, small businesses reported a 40% loss during a major festival season, and children literally had to be escorted to school under heavy police presence. This complete upending of everyday life prevents the community from healing or even adequately supporting the grieving family.
It's just a tragedy all around. Well, to heal and grow after conflict or stagnation, you really need connection. And our final Spotlight article looks at a literal gateway for connection, Madurai Airport.
Yes, a much more positive story to end on.
Definitely. It was declared a customs airport way back in 2010, and finally, in March 2026, it received official approval to become an international terminal. It's already a busy hub, handling nearly 1.4 million passengers last year.
But historically, its growth was entirely blocked, right?
Well, yes, by a lack of bilateral air service agreements, or BASA, and it was deliberately excluded from the ASEAN Open Sky policy just to protect other domestic airports and airlines.
Right. The rationale behind those decades of restrictions was basically strict protectionism. The aviation ministry's fear was that foreign airlines would swoop into Madurai and cannibalize the business from established Indian carriers operating out of larger hubs.
So they just choked it off.
Yeah. By denying Madurai international status to protect domestic airlines, the economic potential of the entire southern region was completely stifled.
It's like building a massive state-of-the-art train station, but the government refuses to lay the tracks to neighboring countries just to protect local domestic bus routes.
That is exactly the dynamic. But now that those restrictive policies have been lifted and the international gates are finally opening, the economic implications are vast.
What are the main benefits they're expecting?
Well, first, it allows direct, seamless connection for the Southern Tamil diaspora to critical economic hubs in West Asia and Singapore.
Right.
Second, it is expected to significantly boost medical tourism to Madurai, which already possesses a robust infrastructure for quality, affordable health care.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
And crucially, it provides the vital logistical framework needed for the broader Madurai-Thoothukudi industrial corridor. Expanding global connectivity fundamentally changes the economic destiny of the entire region.
Wow, that is a massive shift.
It really is. And as you go about your day, consider this. What invisible borders, whether they are blurred from space, legislated in property laws, or restricted by trade agreements, are quietly shaping your movement and your world right now?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.